So when we were first designing the suit for Spider-Man, we had to think about a bunch of things. First, you have to figure out what makes a Spider-Man suit a Spider-Man suit. What was classic about it? So one thing we looked at was obviously the coloring. We kept the red and the blue color because Spider-Man's suit actually comes in a bunch of different colors, but if you're not a Spider-Man fan, you may not even know that. So because we wanted to establish our brand new universe, we decided that it was best to just keep it red and blue because that's what most people are familiar with. And then the other thing we looked at, which was really interesting to me, was the web design and the web patterning. And one thing that's super cool about the web patterning in the classic suits is that it always starts in the center and it emanates outward. But then that web patterning actually continues on the entire design of the suit. So anywhere there's red, for example, that web patterning actually continues. So that's something that we did to continue the classic suit look. And then from there, we actually had to look at what would make it modern and what would make it functional. And one of the things I looked at was, what a 23-year-old would be using as his inspiration when he's creating a suit. So a couple things that we did was we looked at athletic gear. So if you think about how functional athletic gear is and like what it does to support you, what it does to allow flexibility, that's the same type of logic we apply to the suit. So if you look at our suit, you'll see that there's a lot of paneling that might be similar to something you find in athletic gear. We also looked, for example, at athletic shoes. So you'll see that one of the main things that's different about our suit that's different than the classic suit is that there's no longer a red boot. And that's because if you're a 23-year-old, you very much probably are not going to want to wear a red boot. It's not something that it would be cool. We thought an athletic shoe would be more appropriate for someone who's that age. The other thing we did was, in looking at sports gear, was just trying to think about the functionality of the suit. And if you look at the color blocking on the suit, you'll notice that there's actually a lot of rationale behind it. The blue is where we allow flexibility for Spider-Man, so that's where he would require the highest range of motion. Anything that's red is actually made out of a slightly thicker material, and it's what he would be using for armor reinforcement. It's where he might get hit the most, or where he might be, for example, scraping against a building when he's swinging around the city. And then we get to the white. And the white is actually like a flexible carbon fiber. So if you look really closely at it, you'll see the surfacing on it, and you can tell it's carbon fiber. That's located on his chest, it's on his gauntlets, and also on his feet. That's what he would use for, again, when he's fighting, that's where he want reinforcement. And if he's blocking, that's the other reason why you want carbon fiber in those locations. So a lot of effort went into, figuring out the rationale behind this suit. The very first time we worked on this, his anatomy, we actually had sculpted him as like a gangly teenager, right? So he was really lanky, he was a bit skinny, he looked kind of awkward. But when we were playing with that model in game, he didn't look right because, again, he's supposed to be older, he's supposed to be more confident. So it didn't really look right. And then we went the other way and we actually started making him look more like a linebacker or football player. And then you have this really buff, kind of heavyset person like swinging through the city, and that didn't look right either. So we finally settled on something that was a little bit more fluid, more like a fighter's build. And that's what you see in our Spider-Man, someone who's more competent, but again, more experienced. So Spider-Man is really interesting to animate because unlike a lot of superheroes who might fly, for example, or maybe has a super vehicle, he's basically the vehicle, right? So it all comes down to what he's able to do when he's swinging. And there might be the idea of like, well, you can get on a mocap stage, put a stuntman in a rope and just have him swing around and it's gonna look awesome. But that's not actually true because we actually did some funny things. For example, we had the stuntman try to crawl around as if he was stuck to a wall. And it looked cool in real life because a real human being was doing it. But when you transfer that into CG, it actually looks a bit odd. So we actually had to think about like when we would actually use mocap and when it made sense. For example, if he's on the ground and throwing a punch, that would make sense. But when he's swinging, that's not necessarily something that you can mocap. So that was something that we would hand key and maybe use a little bit mocap. But we basically would have to craft that ourselves and add a little stylization to make it look like he's actually swinging. And then the other really cool thing about our animation is that our Spider-Man is obviously a more experienced Spider-Man. He's not just learning how to swing. He actually knows what he's doing. So he swings with a lot of style and a lot of confidence. And that's something else that we wanted to come out in his animation. The other really cool thing about our Spider-Man in particular was just the rig and what went into the rig. Because in a lot of other games, the character's obviously wearing tons of armor or many layers of clothing. From an artistic point of view, Spider-Man is basically a naked man. So that's actually pretty punishing because there's not really any room for error there. You can't hide it with armor. All the deformations have to look absolutely stunning when he's swinging around, so he looks amazing in all of the crouch poses, the extensions, all the acrobatics that you expect from Spider-Man. So we actually have to handcraft the rig where anytime there was a lot of extreme muscle deformation, we would actually hand sculpt all of those poses. So for example, when I raise my arm, my muscles are moving, right? And we actually would sculpt all that musculature in there and then incorporate it into the rig. And there are tons of these hand sculpted pieces inside the rig. So next time you check out one of our trailers when you're playing the game, I mean, definitely look at how Spider-Man's moving and how fluid he's moving, and ask yourself, how did they do that? Because that's part of the magic, I guess, of making this game and creating Spider-Man.